Dudes, 80-20, Nate here with you. I'm doing a lesson here with Chris, and we're speaking about advanced odd meters. So I think to get things started off, I'm going to throw two concepts at you first, and then I'm going to let Chris expand on them. So the first is this idea of Russian nested dolls, which just means that within any bar of an odd meter, let's just say 5/4, there are 2 bars of 5/8 and 4 bars of 5/16. And this concept is going to help you when we get into the next concept, which is additive rhythm versus syncopation. So additive rhythm and syncopation come into play, especially when we're talking about kind of compound sounding odd meters, much like this from Tigran's tune, Out of the Grid. So there are two ways to feel a tune like that, and one is in additive rhythm and one is in syncopation. So additive rhythm just means that you're breaking the phrases down by their component parts. So that's 2 bars of 5/16, 1 bar of 7/16, 3 bars of 5/16. So that's one way to think about it. Now, syncopation is when you relate everything to a common denominator. And not all tunes are easily distillable into a common denominator. But with some of Tigran's tunes, you might be surprised. So syncopation is when you relate everything to a common denominator, meaning you try to put like a quarter note or a half note underneath it, and hopefully the meter will cycle around. So a good example to illustrate this is Kendrick Scott's tune, We Are the Drum. Because there's a vamp in the sort of bridge section that sounds really additive, and you can think of it that way, but you can also relate it to a common pulse. So the part from the Kendrick song sounds like this. So da 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 da, etc. But watch what happens when I add the hi-hat. 2, 3, 4. It's really just 2 bars of big 5. It turns around at the beginning. So in that case, it's useful to think of things as syncopation. And I promise I'll explain more in my next segment. But first, to delve deeper into these two concepts of Russian nesting dolls and additive rhythm, I give you Chris.
What's up, guys? I'm Chris. It's my first video lesson. I'm happy to be here doing it with Nate, the 80-20 drummer. He's a good dude. All the stuff he teaches is top-notch. And, yeah, I'll try to just pick up where he left off, which he brought up this idea of Russian nesting dolls as applied to time signatures. To me, it deals mainly with zooming in and out on subdivisions. using the same base, like, numerator of a time signature, but just applying it to a smaller subdivision.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
They all fit within each other. And, but they all have totally different feels. A part in a song may be just one of those feels. But say later on you want to go improvise over that, or just equip yourself with the tools to be able to if you're ever in a situation like that. It gives you a huge leg up to be able to hear where each one of those would be at any given moment while you're playing. But say you want to take it to the next level, this is a great way to do it. To practice each one of those smaller or bigger time signatures within whatever the main one is that you want to use, to the point to where you can feel them within any one of them. And a good way to do this is practicing to a click. A quarter note bass click is probably the best. Or, no, you can go smaller, you can go any way you want. But for this specific example, I'm going to use a 5/4 click and go from 5/4 to 5/8 to 5/16, back up, and then mix them together. And I'll have it on the screen so you can see what I'm doing. And yeah, here you go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4.
Alright, hopefully that example I just showed you was able to shed some light on what I was talking about before. Now what I want to get into is applying that same concept to a bit more tricked out rhythmic structure. And for this example, I want to use the Tigran song, The Grid. Now, like Nate was talking about before, this one is more of an additive kind of vibe. It's not so much syncopation, although it technically is, but throughout the whole song you really don't, it's like most Tigran tunes, there's a big like aha moment where they're just like kabam, and just sound that they just play 4 and all these crazy hits that they had and nutty time signature arrangements. All click and make sense. Yeah, so I'll start off approaching it additively, playing each little chunk as is, and then I'll begin to break off and kind of imply a larger subdivision feel over certain portions of the form. And I'll, on the screen, highlight what's going where, and yeah, show you how having this mentality going into playing stuff like this can allow you a lot more freedom and comfortability within tricky rhythmic arrangements like this. You don't always have to use them, but it frees you up knowing what's where at all times. Here's the example. again, hopefully you were able to get something out of that. I'm going to turn it back to Nate now, so he can turn it back to me next.
So Chris just took you a little bit through the Russian nesting doll approach. The idea that within a single bar of 5, there are 2 bars of 5/8 and 4 bars of 5/16. So that's going to dovetail into what I talk about next, which I see as kind of the 2 principal challenges of playing odd meters. And one is finding a comfort level, a beat level where you can be comfortable and where your phrasing is going to be the best. And the other is being able to play with clave and against clave. So I'll explain what both of those mean. But first, I want to talk about finding a beat level that allows you to phrase the best. So say, just for instance, you're playing 5/16 and it's something just really up, like so that's about the most difficult case scenario you can imagine. And in the second half of my segment here, I'll tell you how to get better at playing that sort of stuff, which is going to come in handy when we go back to the Tigran tune. But just suppose that it's in that regular meter for the entire tune. So you can use Chris's nested doll approach to, for instance, feel the 8th note against that 5/16. Because remember, if you're playing, that figures evenly into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So where before you were restricted to this very small box, everything is within this 5/16 matrix. If you start feeling it in 5/8, all of a sudden it gives you more phrase options. You can employ that same device to give yourself a narrower box to focus in if, for instance, you're playing something that's in a slow 5/4. So 4, 5. You know, maybe phrasing in that big 5 feels awkward to you. Maybe it feels like there are too many big spaces. So just remember that within every bar of that 5/4, there are 2 bars of 5/8. So even if you're feeling 4, 5, underneath that you can play . Right, you can play Mission Impossible underneath that. So that's one way to use Chris's device to just open yourself up and feel the phrase better. Okay, now let's talk briefly about how to tell if a compound odd meter tune works as a syncopation. In other words, can you put a quarter or half note underneath it? Or if it requires you to approach it completely additively. So some things will be sort of intuitive. And you can certainly feel things out by trying to play a quarter or half note underneath things. And even by writing them out in 4/4 or 5/4 or something and gaining a hunch about it. But in certain cases, melodies, particularly Tigrans, will have this kind of Mobius effect where you're not 100% sure where to put the beat because the additive elements like the 5 groups of 16 anchor your ear so strongly to those resolution points that you're not feeling the quarter note in the right place. And in this case, I want to point to a method which 2 friends of the channel, one, my man Nick Russo, who corrected me when I was wrong on an earlier version of this lesson, and the other, my buddy Jesse Myers, who transcribes these lessons, which is you simply write things out and add them up and see if the math works out. So for instance, out of the grid, two bars of 5/16, 1 bar of 7/16, 3 bars of 5/16. So let's add those up. 2 plus 5 is 10, plus 7 is 17, plus 3 plus 5 is 15. 17 and 15 equals 32. So it does indeed work over 4. And if you look back at the tune, it's actually exactly the same type of syncopation that Chris was dealing with in the first part of that sort of 2-tune suite by Tigran called the grid. It's the same. In the grid, the syncopation is like 3, 4. And of course, with the quarter note, that's. And then out of the grid is this. Right? So really quickly, how did I practice this? First, I wrote it out. I figured out where the quarters were. And then I practiced putting the quarters in 2 places. So the first was, as I just showed you in the feet. So 3, 4. So that's useful in one respect. And the next place I put it was actually in the hands, where Chris used it to great effect illustrating the grid. So that would just sound like this. 3, 4. And then I kind of did a hybrid of it, where I would try to still keep the basic elements of the quarter and the hi-hat, but I would also allow myself to syncopate. And that's how I came up with some of these ideas. So that would sound like this. 3, 4. Right, so I'm catching the quarter notes sometimes and then other times I'm not. And let me just throw out a couple cool ideas I came up with playing over this that will sound cool over it. So with the 5, you can also do this thing that's like. So let me play a bar of the regular and a bar of the variation. 3, 4. And you can throw in orchestrations like. And finally, you can do some spanky type of stuff. Okay, so those are all ways you can start to feel out of the grid in a more syncopated way. So now let's look at another tune and see if that works out as syncopation, or if it's entirely additive. Okay, with this tune, the basic structure is so it's 1 bar of 4 and then a bar of 5/16. So the best way to think about this beat is completely additively. So now, to see where Chris goes with this, I'm going to hand it back over to him. Chris, good luck, buddy.